Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Sara Young to the stage.
7 years ago, I was in my car on my way to my job for corporate America. And even though it was the middle of January, all the windows were down and the radio was as loud as it could go, and I was just screaming until my throat was raw in an attempt to stay awake long enough to get to work and not crash my car first by falling asleep. And it was like this every time I drove. And it wasn't just driving that I was tired. I was always falling asleep in movies and at concerts and definitely in all the meetings I had at work. My doctor finally diagnosed me with chronic fatigue, which really just meant that he had no idea what was going on either. Yeah. But he gave me a note for HR that was in my file that said if they found me sleeping at my desk, they couldn't fire me. So that was pretty awesome. The only time that I wasn't just dead on my feet was if I was etching or engraving or being creative in some fashion. And I just thought at this point that being an adult was having the 9-to-5 job that you didn't like with health insurance and paying your bills and then dying. Yeah. But I wasn't always like this. Right from the beginning, being creative was as natural and as needed to me as breathing. I loved words. And I was reading before I went to kindergarten. And I was writing my first stories by the time I was 7. It was the summer of, I was about 11. And I wrote an actual book with chapters and page numbers. And I felt really accomplished and very fancy. In middle school, I was the only girl in the woodworking shop classes. And when we got to pick our own project to put together, I went big. And I made a 7-foot-tall carpeted cat tree with 3 platforms for my cat made out of 2x4s that my dad had to figure out how to drag home from the school. In 11th grade, my favorite teacher, Jan Mekula, challenged me to write an entry for every category in the Scholastic Writing Contest. And there were 10 categories, and I came away with 7 first, 2 second, and 1 third. And I knew that this was just a part of who I was. And then I discovered photography, and I would live for the first really bad snowstorms that no one else would go out for. But I had my special place in Hines Drive, and I would go and shoot photos of the unbroken snow and photos that looked like black and white, but they weren't. And then I discovered glass etching, and I got to use razors and tape and acid cream and sandblasters and make my own templates for the etching. And I eventually came into lasers. And this allowed me to combine everything, my drawing and woodworking and photography, all into one package that just gives me joy to talk about. After I graduated high school, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, whoever really is. And I followed another friend and went to Western Michigan for my freshman and sophomore years. And this is where I met him, the narcissist. John was the boyfriend that was troubled and mysterious. And he was the boyfriend who told me I was the only one that really understood him and really got him. And he was the boyfriend who slowly separated me from all of my family and all of my friends. I would miss family dinners all the time because he would make sure to get me home too late to join, and he would never accept the invitations that were always offered. During the summers, my friends from high school would only see me if John dropped me off and took off before the door was even closed behind me on his car, and they were waiting around the corner to try to catch us. In my junior year, I transferred to Michigan State, and we would trade weekends. And either I would go down to Western or he'd come up to State. Only on his weekends to come up, it was me waiting by my phone to see if I would get a call saying I was worth it for him to come up. And Fridays turned into maybe Saturdays, turned into, oh, it's too late now, Sundays. John would always say things like, "You're okay for now, but I'm looking just to let you know." And when I did visit him at Western, I would find the letters that I had written and the pictures I had sent in the garbage under his cigarette butts and garbage. But these hooks that he had set in my brain had me addicted to him, because by this time, all of my emotional support came from him, because he had separated me from everybody else. And I didn't dare push back, because if I had and I crossed an imaginary line that he said, or I broke a rule that I didn't know, he would subject me to these horrible silent treatments that would go anywhere from a couple hours to days while I was figuring he was finding the person that he was looking for, and until I had apologized enough or begged enough to be just not invisible anymore. And it was my reflex action to this. And it became just this horrifying dance of control. And, I thought I loved him, and I thought he loved me, but nothing I ever did was good enough or special enough to be remembered. My 21st birthday happened on one of these weekends that he was supposed to come to State. And the friend that I had followed to Western had actually been a friend of a roommate of John's, which is how I met him, and he had also transferred to State. And so he was at my apartment while we waited for this phone call from John. And he said, "Sara, it's your 21st birthday. You have to go out and get just one drink, and you're with me. It'll be okay." So I went and I got my drink, and when we got back to my apartment, the phone was ringing, and I picked it up, and John was shrieking on the other side. "Where were you? Why didn't you answer your phone? Who were you with? You're not allowed to do this." And David, my friend, took the phone and said, "John, it's me." But John was so out of his mind, he didn't even realize he wasn't yelling at me anymore, and he just slammed down the phone. And David looked at me with absolute pity and said, "Sara, I had no idea." Well, how would he have known? I never talked about this, but I knew right then I never wanted to see anybody looking at me that way ever again. When I woke up the next morning, Divine Providence was on the radio in the form of REO Speedwagon's "Time to Fly." And I took that as a sign, and I called John, and that was the end of that. The man that would become my husband was already a friend during this period, and about 5 months after the breakup, we started officially dating. And the difference between him and John was just night and day. But these hooks in my brain had been set. And I had never heard the term narcissist or gaslighting until after I was married and was taking a class in women's self-defense class. And the instructor had a section on other forms of abuse besides physical ones, and started listing all the signs of being under the influence of a narcissist. Gaslighting, being separated from your family and friends, being dependent on the abuser for all emotional dependence, having to act a certain way to be rewarded. And I was horrified. And I realized I had been emotionally, mentally abused for 3 years. 3 years. How did I not know this? And I had, continued to create during this time, but the passion just wasn't there. Why would I bother to create if it wasn't going to be good enough or worth anything that someone would want to see? And this leads me to my years in corporate America, where I had all of these jobs where I was never quite good enough and I never quite fit in, no matter how hard I tried. I was always the round peg in the square cubicle holes. And we come to April 2017 when I was screaming my way into work every day. And I was so, I needed that job so badly because my husband had just been diagnosed with colon cancer, and the insurance that I had at this particular job was phenomenal. 2 weeks before his surgery, they let me know that I, once again, was not quite good enough, and they downsized me. And no matter how hard, I was sick to my stomach, and no matter how hard I pled my case and I did that damn dance that I was trained to do, they still let me go. But that gave me the opportunity to be with my husband 100% during his surgery and during his full recovery. And we're 7 years later, completely cancer-free. And for this, I will always be grateful. But I did find another contract job with corporate America, and my sleepwalking through life continued. December 2017, the day before the holiday break, I had given my teammates etched tumblers that I had made for holiday gifts. And a friend of mine came up to me and asked, "Sara, can you etch wood and glass and rubber and whatnot?" And I said, I can. And he asked me a question that would just change how I looked at what my life could be. And he said, "Why aren't you etching custom gun stocks?" And this ray of light broke through the fatigue that I still had. Yeah. And I thought, why aren't I etching custom gun stocks? Etching the wood part of the rifle, for what people wanted on it, certainly sounded like something that would be a lot more fun to do as my career. But that self-doubt jumped in. What would that look like? How did I think I was going to be good enough at that? Where would I find people to etch for? An hour later, my contract company showed up to let me know that I was not quite good enough again, and they were letting me go and cleaning out my desk as we talked. Only this time, I felt such relief at hearing this horrible news. I had 12 weeks of unemployment to figure this new thing out. And I knew in my gut that this was my chance for escape. So with a big smile on my face, I said, "That's okay, I have a plan." And I turned my back on corporate America. Amen. Through the entire time that I've known my husband, whatever my dreams are, he has taken it upon himself to do what he can to make them happen for me. So when I got home early that day and I said, "Guess what? I'm now a custom laser gun stock engraver. Surprise!" He just said, "Cool, let's figure this out." And this switch was flipped. And I realized that even though I hadn't spoken with John in over 30 years at this point, I was still left thinking that I was not enough, not good enough to even be happy. And I also realized that because of what he wanted, he didn't want me to shine. And in order for me to tamp back, my natural shine, all that energy that I spent in creating, I turned inside to dull my shine so that he would like me. And that was the root cause of all my chronic fatigue. Because that nonsense and the chronic fatigue disappeared that day. Instead of thinking, I can't do that, I started saying, what if? What if I etched sample gun stocks and I found a circuit of gun and knife shows to sell them at, and I had tables of merchandise that I made because I wanted to make them for selling. And within 3 shows, I had people coming specifically to find me to place custom orders. So I was officially a laser artist. But what else? What if I wanted to figure out how to get my license with the state and begin making and commercially selling a recipe for sugar-free cinnamon and spice almonds that I had created when I was in the middle of losing 200 pounds? Yeah. Mission accomplished. But there is still more. What if? What if I found out that making a room full of strangers laugh and become friends of mine after hearing my jokes or coming to a comedy show that I produce was equally terrifying and intoxicating? And it was amazing. It was. But there was still more. So, what if? What if I finally had the time, energy, and the compulsion to go back to my absolute first love, the one that's hardwired into me and it's natural to me is breathing. And I dusted off my number 2 pencils and started writing down my words and telling my stories. Seven years later from that very fateful day, what can I say about finally living my life exactly as I need to live it and being true to myself and letting my power and my joy just shine? There is really only one thing left to say. Happy rebirthday to me. Thank you.
Sara Young, everybody.